Happy Whiskey Wednesday, everybody. I am Rashawn Hall, a Part-Time Stories, and this is another edition of our Women in Whiskey series where we are talking to some amazing women who are making great whiskey, making great cocktails, and just making positive changes and impacts on the whiskey and hospitality industry at large. And this week is no exception. Our guest this week has been in the spirits industry for quite a while and has now launched her own canned cocktail that she's going to tell us a little bit about. So I'd like to bring in Amanda Victoria, CEO and co-founder of Symphony Whiskey Spritz. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to be here, Rashawn. Thank you so much for having me and featuring us this week.
Oh, thank you. So let's just start a little bit with your background. For those who don't know you, I have followed your career from afar for a while now and have been a fan. So thank you for doing this again. But just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in hospitality and how you got your start in the industry.
Sure, absolutely. So I got my start in the hospitality, wine, and spirits industry. In about 2005, I was working as a hostess at a Michelin star restaurant in the West Village as a very young woman, around the time I became legal age in the world of drinking. I had the opportunity to fall in love with wine at that point very early on and to fall in love with hospitality and the way that we serve our guests at the restaurant back in the day was very beautiful song and dance, so to speak.
Okay. And in doing some of that research, you obviously went from that to I'm assuming bartending and getting into that space. And in doing some of my research, you said one of the first things you fell in love with back in 2005 was whiskey and the old fashioned. Tell us a little bit about that. That initial romance, if you will.
Yes. So 2005 was many moons ago at this point. Having worked my way up from the hostess position to becoming a cocktail waitress and then eventually a bartender behind the bar, at some of these greatly awarded bars in New York City, including the no longer with us Pegu Club and PDT and Dutch Kills out of the Milk and Honey Group. It was really quite a time. It was the time to bring back fresh ingredients and fresh juice in cocktails and using the best ingredients, which very much has inspired my path to where it is today, I guess 17, 18, 15 years later. So I came into the world of spirits through wine initially, through hospitality initially, but whiskey was my first true love. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was drinking old fashions before they were back in fashion, so to speak, and then enjoying whiskey's neat and really understanding the nuances of flavor and wood and all of the great love that goes into whiskey. Started at a very early stage of my career. A couple decades ago, I guess a decade and a half ago.
Okay. And having that perspective, how do you think whiskey has changed? Obviously, it's very trendy right now. You've got the hunters and you got people buying and collecting. You got millennials who are really into it. What have you seen change over this time?
Yeah. So somewhere between now and then being the early 2000s, there was a whiskey rush, another resurgence in whiskey, where we saw people that were mostly in hospitality and people that enjoyed more esoteric sips, so to speak, and then enjoying whiskey, but then it going to a more mainstream scenario. So whiskey has been up and up and up since then. It's the ceiling, I think, of whiskey I still think we are on our way up. So it was great to have a career that kind of paralleled the whiskey rising moment. And seeing whiskey become more mainstream in real time, going through that Mad Men era, so to speak, and then just beyond that and before that, what whiskey looked like, what whiskey cocktails look like before Mad Men and after Mad Men. There was a before and an after of the latest resurgence in cocktail and whiskey love in the consumer zeitgeist level, if that makes sense.
No, that not only makes sense, I never thought of it that way, and would love to hear more about that. But let's talk a bit more about your profession. And Symphony, we can definitely get back to that. So you mentioned, being in hospitality, being in some of those, those amazing heritage cocktail bars that we all, many of us have heard about and have had the opportunity to visit, and how that played a part in the importance of Symphony. So tell us a little bit about how Symphony came to be, and where that kind of hospitality and that fresh, that focus on freshness and fresh juices brings it in together.
Sure. That focus on, in one word, ingredients for me, how I think about it. So in 2019, there was a summer that we all experienced. It was the summer before the pandemic had begun. It's still going on, as we know. But backing up to that summer moment right before the beginning of the end of times. Everyone was drinking something in their hand, and it was in a can, a slim can. And at that point, I had been in the business for well over 10 years, maybe 10, 15 years, and was also 6 months pregnant. So I was a little bit frustrated that everyone had this can in their hands and didn't know what was inside of the can. So at that point, I had spent some years traveling the world and focusing my career on spirits education and production and family generational production practices and companies that really were able to speak to the way they were producing their products, what they were made of, had high integrity around ingredients. And everyone was drinking that summer something that nobody really knew. They thought they were drinking a vodka soda. There was a big misconception moment. So I was frustrated, and I saw an opportunity in the fall of 2019, October specifically. Symphony came together officially with a focus on education, or rather an offering around something with better ingredients inside of the can. So everything that we wanted to bring into the can was definitely inspired by my earlier years in my career, where we focused on ingredients. And the word craft is definitely obviously overused, and we've gone very far with the word craft and back into the word craft, but a craftsmanship of creating something authentic, with integrity, with time, and better for you, and the best ingredients that we could possibly find. So the inspiration was coming out of that summer and that moment somewhere after that summer and somewhere before the pandemic, wanting to offer something convenient, but also luxurious, I guess. So like an attainable luxury, being able to open your fridge and say, this is a really great cocktail. Even though it comes in a can, it doesn't mean that it can't be delicious and have quality ingredients in it.
Okay. And was whiskey always the base? Was that always, from the beginning, was like, this is going to be a canned whiskey based cocktail?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you think of the dichotomy of the early seltzers and spritz seltzers that came out, and how they were pretty stripped of flavor, and then the flavor was added back into it. Symphony was created with thinking about flavor from the backbone of the entire recipe. The entire concept had to be flavor. And in order to do that, I found doing a spicy aged rye whiskey in a can and building a cocktail around that brought this element of flavor that was delicious and real, and not synthetic or fake by any means, but real flavor. So we didn't have to add any additives or anything on top of that. When you try a can of Symphony, the taste, in my opinion, is you can taste every individual ingredient that's going on in there, because there's so few ingredients, and each ingredient is the best version of itself. So really trying to bring that type of trade up to the can world, the world of canned cocktails.
Okay. And tell everyone what those 4 core ingredients are for the cocktail.
So we were what I believe to be the first to put an aged whiskey in a can specifically. So we have a 4 to 7 year old aged rye whiskey in there, along with real actual lemon juice, a touch of honey, just a touch, less than 1 gram of sugar. It barely measures, but it's in there for a softness and a delicateness of the wildflowers that brings a beautiful tasting note to it. And then carbonated water, carbonated to perfection. So in essence, it's just a really quality highball cocktail, or a whiskey spritz is something that I communicate it as, because it has the lemon and a touch of honey too, as well as the soda water. So yeah, that's what's going on in the can.
Okay. And interestingly, I know it is a rye from New York, and not, a quote unquote traditional Southern, Kentucky rye. What made you all decide, obviously being a New York City based brand, being a business based in New York, was that what made you choose something locally, or?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. We wanted to go with something local for many reasons, but the biggest ones being our supply chain and keeping everything local and close together as possible. My partner, my co-founder, and I are born and raised in New York City for the most part. So we have this strong tie to the state of New York. We all know in the world of whiskey that New York State has a beautiful, storied whiskey production that is making some of the best whiskeys out there. And then being able to showcase the locality of New York, and then an homage to our upbringing, and then also all local ingredients and keeping things as sustainable as possible. So it's as much as we could bring into our full story is the whiskey from New York State.
Okay. And what inspired the name Siponey?
So the naming process of any company is, I think any entrepreneur, any business person, anybody that is working in a creative pursuit can say that when you have to come up with a book title, or the name of a cocktail, or the name of a commercially produced cocktail like Siponey, there's a lot of pressure. So my partner and myself made some space to kind of riff back and forth for as long as we needed to come to this name together. It ended up just coming out on the couch one day in conversation, and we were like, that just works for so many reasons. It was a word that hadn't been used prior, which is also kind of rare. And I think it speaks to the honey, of course, and the honey bees, even more importantly, with our environmental story. So it's just creating space to riff back and forth. I often think that the name just was downloaded to me somehow, and it was just something that we had to go with. But yeah, it's catchy. It works for us. And I think it conveys what we are as indirectly, but directly as possible.
Okay. And, like I said, in doing research, I was watching, you guys have some great Symphony videos on YouTube, and was kind of watching the origin story, and loved what you had to say about being both a Latina founder and a woman founder. Tell us a little bit about the importance of that to you.
Yeah, the importance of being a woman founder and a Latina founder, both and separately, I think are the biggest word that comes to mind is representation. I'm now a mother, as I mentioned. This product was created around the same time that I became a mother for the first time. And I've acknowledged in my daughter's life how important it is to have representation as she's growing up. So to be a woman in business and a Latina in business in a position that mostly isn't occupied by women still, and definitely not by Latinas or people of color still. To me, the importance of that and what that means to me is offering representation and a path forward for people behind me who will probably do a better job at it. But here I am with an opportunity to create something and push a business forward. And I hope that inspires other people that look like me, which are a little atypical in this role, to go forward and do some great work.
And I love that point, because that is why we initially started doing this series. It was the initial comment. So yes, there are so many amazing people of all walks of life, but particularly, there are definitely a lot of guys who either look like me or look like me and are white, but who are in the space, and that's fine. And that's great. But you don't. I wasn't as familiar with some of the great women who are of all walks of life, who are in this industry and doing these great things. However, I think there is a bit of we learned doing this series. As I've learned doing this series, there's a bit of a misnomer or a certain feel around the term "women in whiskey." What is your take on that term?
I hear you when you say that there's an air around women in whiskey, and looking at this as that. It's twofold, right? So it's an opportunity to create a stage and again, showcase more women and get us out there and be able to share our stories and a platform to do so, which is excellent. So that's positive. At the same time, when we get to the point where it could just be people in whiskey, that would be, I think, an accomplishment for women in the whiskey industry. It has been an uphill battle for women to be represented in whiskey, in all walks of whiskey. When I used to work in Scotch, that was a whole nother story many years ago. And yeah, again, so it's twofold. I'd love to continue to see and be the change, but it's almost like showing, not telling, rather.
Absolutely. Cool. So yeah, let's I know that that's always the deepest question or the provocative question. Let's have a little fun. What is, as someone who has been with you quite a while, what is your go-to cocktail these days? Is it still the old fashioned since you were early on, or is it something else you can?
So I do drink a lot of Siponey, and I love being the biggest part of my drinking in my job is always making sure that we have a whiskey source that we believe in and that checks all of the boxes, from flavor to how it's produced, who it's being made by, et cetera. Basically vetting the whiskey. So I get to try quite a lot of whiskeys. I get whiskey mail a lot. And I think anyone who's out there getting whiskey mail is in a very fortunate position. And so I'm always sampling neat spirits. I always have my nose in neat whiskeys for the most part. And with that, I do suffer from sometimes palate fatigue or I need something even more pungent than the next one. So I love, of course, Islay scotches and that flavor, that pungent range of whiskey that you can get. But yeah, I'd love in a world to start my evening with a can of Symphony, maybe have 1 or 1.5 cans of Symphony and finish the evening with a dram from Islay or something that is like a dynamic, fruity and smoky sipping whiskey. And there are some great ones that we're seeing out of the US right now, but also historically, I love Scotch.
Okay. I like that you stayed on brand. I like 100% on brand. So you also mentioned, yes, doing this job and getting whiskey mail and tasting it, and being a mother and a business owner, it's a lot. So how do you define balance? How do you find that work-life balance?
The work-life balance of becoming a mother for me, and then working in spirits, it was definitely weird when I was working in spirits. And unfortunately, I use the word weird, but it was interesting when I was pregnant as a spirits professional. And then, of course, moving into the role of motherhood after that. And then, of course, the pandemic was happening. So for the first 14 months of my daughter's life, she was home really every minute with me, as we were building this company. But as in more recent times, I have this great network of support that allows me to focus on building Siponey while still being a very present mother as well. So the work-life balance for that is, I think, just knowing that everything is temporary, everything is transitory in some way. If you're in a rough spot, you can make slow changes to move things in the right direction. And for any parents out there working from home in the pandemic, major shout out to them. And that's been an impossible feat, but it's also made my brain work in ways that it's unlocked new ways of working that are kind of neurotic, but also I get the job done. And balance, work-life balance is an ongoing everyday thing. I think it will be till the last day of my career.
Okay, cool. And, we always like to end with a few fun questions. So first question is, if you could have a can of Symphony, a cold can of Symphony, hanging out with anyone alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, man. I always want to remember this question. I've tweeted about this quite a bit and I always forget. Most recently, I did want to have a cocktail with Bernie Sanders, just to get into his mind a little bit more, of course, who wouldn't. So I'll go ahead and put that on the record for now.
Okay. All right. I like it. I like it. And finally, a favorite, you said you travel quite a bit. Where, if you are not in New York City, so let's remove the hometown. So I'm not going to put that pressure on you. Where's your favorite place to have a can of Symphony? What's a great place, great location, city?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
of course, I haven't traveled that much in the past few years with Siponey, but let's say a place that I've been to that I would love to bring Siponey to, Scotland for sure, Paris and the south of France for sure, San Francisco for sure. These are my favorite places that I've been in my limited viewpoint of the world. But yeah, I think a sunset in San Francisco with a can of Siponey, I've actually had that. That was very enjoyable.
Okay, nice. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for doing this. If you can just tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find Symphony, yeah, that'd be, I think that'd be great, because you were nice enough to send me a care package, and I highly recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because you have time talking to you, but yeah, I too have had my fair share of canned cocktail mail, and Symphony definitely stands out, not only as a whiskey drinker, but just, yes, there is a difference there. It's not a clear spirit based cocktail. And I really think that, folks will really enjoy it.
Great. Thank you so much, Rashawn, for having me and for this whole series on women and whiskey. For those looking to find Siponey at home, shop Siponey.com. We deliver nearly nationwide. We're also across restaurants and bars in about 13 states. That's Siponey.com. And you can find me, Amanda Victoria, online at Amanda Victoria OG across all major social media. Thank you so much again.
All right. Thank you. And everyone, drink responsibly and have a good night.